When my sister Amanda physically struck my 7-year-old daughter Emma in front of her entire second-grade class during a school volunteer event, I thought the humiliation and shock could not possibly get worse. Then I discovered the real reason behind her attack, and the calculated cruelty of my own family's betrayal left me speechless. What happened next, when my husband Admiral Marcus Blackwood learned about the incident, changed everything about how our families would interact forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Victoria Blackwood, and this story begins not with that devastating moment at Riverside Elementary School, but with the years of quiet sacrifice and invisible burden that led up to it. At 34 years old, I had spent the better part of a decade believing that family loyalty meant absorbing endless criticism, financial manipulation, and emotional abuse, while maintaining a facade of harmony that protected everyone except myself and my immediate family. The foundation of my story rests in the complex dynamics that developed within the Harrison family after my father's unexpected death 7 years earlier. Dad had been the stabilizing force in our household, the quiet mediator who managed my mother's volatile emotions and my sister Amanda's increasingly erratic behavior with patience and wisdom that seemed inexhaustible. His sudden passing from a heart attack at 59 had left our family structure fundamentally altered, with power dynamics shifting in ways that would prove destructive for years to come. My mother, Eleanor Harrison, had responded to widowhood by becoming increasingly dependent on external validation and financial security. At 62, she possessed neither the emotional resilience nor the practical skills necessary to manage her own affairs independently. Her solution involved creating elaborate systems of guilt and manipulation designed to ensure that her children would provide the emotional and financial support she required, regardless of the impact on their own lives and families. Amanda, my younger sister by 3 years, had embraced her new role as Mom's primary emotional confidant and financial advisor with enthusiasm that bordered on obsession. She had moved back into our childhood home within months of Dad's funeral, ostensibly to provide companionship and assistance during Mom's period of grief. However, this arrangement had evolved into a codependent relationship that served both women's need for control while creating impossible expectations for my involvement in their shared dysfunction. The geographic distance between my life and theirs should have provided natural protection from their increasingly unreasonable demands. Marcus and I lived in Norfolk, Virginia, where his position as Rear Admiral in the United States Coast Guard required our presence near his command responsibilities. Our home, an elegant colonial house in a well-established neighborhood near the naval base, reflected the stability and prosperity that Marcus's 22-year military career had provided for our family. Marcus had transitioned seamlessly from his Coast Guard leadership role into the corporate world, accepting a position as Chief Executive Officer of Atlantic Maritime Solutions, a Fortune 500 company specializing in marine logistics and security services. His unique combination of military leadership experience and operational expertise had made him an exceptionally effective corporate executive, leading the company through a period of unprecedented growth and profitability that had established his reputation as one of the most capable leaders in the maritime industry. Our daughter Emma had been born into this environment of stability, achievement, and clear expectations for excellence. At 7 years old, she displayed the confidence and curiosity that develop naturally when children grow up in households where their emotional and physical needs are consistently met by parents who prioritize their well-being above all other considerations. However, the 2-hour drive that separated Norfolk from my mother's home in Richmond had not prevented Mom and Amanda from treating me as their primary source of financial assistance and emotional support. Their demands had escalated gradually over the years, beginning with reasonable requests for help with household repairs and emergency expenses, then progressing to expectations for regular monthly contributions and constant availability for various crises that always seemed to require my immediate attention and resources. The financial obligations had become particularly burdensome over the past 3 years. Mom's house, a modest ranch-style home that Dad had purchased in 1987, required constant maintenance and repairs that exceeded her limited income from Social Security and Dad's modest pension. Amanda, who had never maintained steady employment for longer than 18 months, contributed minimally to household expenses, while generating additional costs through her expensive lifestyle preferences and impulsive purchasing decisions. My monthly financial contributions to their household had grown from occasional assistance to regular transfers totaling nearly $3,000 each month. This amount covered Mom's mortgage payments, household utilities, groceries, Amanda's car payment, and various unexpected expenses that seemed to arise with suspicious frequency. Marcus and I could afford these contributions without significant hardship, but the psychological burden of constant financial obligation had created resentment that I struggled to acknowledge or address. The emotional demands proved even more exhausting than the financial obligations. Mom required daily phone calls during which she would recount detailed narratives about her health concerns, social interactions, and various grievances against neighbors, healthcare providers, and service personnel, who had allegedly treated her with insufficient respect or consideration. These conversations typically lasted 45 minutes to an hour, during which I was expected to provide sympathetic responses and practical advice, while avoiding any suggestion that her problems might be self-created or exaggerated. Amanda's communication style involved crisis-driven phone calls that interrupted family dinners, work meetings, and personal time with demands for immediate problem-solving assistance. Her crises ranged from legitimate emergencies requiring urgent response to manufactured dramas designed to secure attention and sympathy. Distinguishing between genuine needs and manipulative demands had become increasingly difficult, as Amanda possessed sophisticated skills for presenting every situation as urgent and catastrophic. The impact of these dynamics on my marriage and relationship with Emma had been gradual but significant. Marcus, with his military background and corporate leadership experience, understood family loyalty and financial responsibility, but he had grown increasingly concerned about the toll that constant crisis management was taking on my emotional well-being and our family time. His attempts to suggest boundaries or limitations had been met with my defensive explanations about family obligations and the temporary nature of Mom and Amanda's needs. Emma had begun asking questions about why Grandma Eleanor and Aunt Amanda never visited our home, why our conversations with them always seemed to involve arguments or tears, and why Mommy always appeared upset after talking to them on the phone. Her innocent observations had forced me to confront uncomfortable realities about the example I was setting and the family dynamics I was perpetuating through my inability to establish healthy boundaries. The pattern of manipulation had become so normalized within our family system that I had lost perspective on what constituted reasonable requests versus exploited demands. Mom and Amanda had developed sophisticated strategies for presenting their needs in ways that made refusal appear selfish and uncaring, while my own conflict avoidance tendencies and deeply ingrained sense of family obligation made me vulnerable to their emotional manipulation. The school volunteer incident that would change everything had occurred during one of Amanda's periodic attempts to demonstrate her capability as a responsible family member. She had offered to accompany me to Emma's classroom reading event, ostensibly to spend quality time with her niece and support her educational activities. I had welcomed her participation, hoping that positive interaction with Emma might inspire Amanda to develop more stable life goals and healthier relationship patterns. Riverside Elementary School's family reading program encouraged parents and relatives to participate in classroom activities that supported literacy development and community engagement. Emma had been excited about the opportunity to introduce her aunt to her teacher and classmates, having heard my carefully edited stories about Amanda's creative talents and artistic interests throughout her childhood. The morning of the reading event had begun normally, with Emma selecting her favorite book and practicing the passage she planned to read aloud to the class. Amanda had arrived at our house 30 minutes late, as usual, but appeared appropriately dressed and reasonably focused on the planned activity. Her mood seemed stable, without the agitation or emotional volatility that sometimes accompanied her social interactions. The drive to Emma's school had proceeded without incident, with Amanda maintaining pleasant conversation about Emma's academic progress and extracurricular interests. She had asked thoughtful questions about Emma's friends, favorite subjects, and teacher relationships that suggested genuine interest in her niece's development and well-being. I had felt cautiously optimistic that this experience might mark the beginning of a healthier relationship between Amanda and Emma. Emma's second-grade classroom reflected the warm, nurturing environment that had made Riverside Elementary School our preferred choice for her education. Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's teacher, had created a space that balanced academic rigor with emotional support, encouraging students to take intellectual risks while providing the structure and guidance necessary for their success. The reading program had been designed to celebrate family relationships while building students' confidence in public speaking and literary analysis. The initial portion of the classroom visit had proceeded exactly as planned. Emma had introduced Amanda to Mrs. Rodriguez and several of her classmates with obvious pride in her family connection. Amanda had responded appropriately to these introductions, demonstrating the social skills that had made her charming and engaging during her better moments throughout our shared childhood. However, the situation had begun to deteriorate when Emma was selected to read her chosen passage to the assembled group of students, parents, and relatives. Emma had selected a challenging chapter from a book that exceeded her grade level, demonstrating the advanced reading skills and intellectual confidence that Marcus and I had carefully cultivated through years of educational support and encouragement. As Emma began reading, her clear articulation and sophisticated comprehension became apparent to everyone present. Several parents and Mrs. Rodriguez offered quiet words of praise and encouragement, acknowledging Emma's exceptional abilities and preparation. The positive attention and recognition should have been a source of pride for any family member present to witness Emma's performance. Instead, Amanda's expression had shifted from polite interest to barely concealed irritation as Emma continued reading with growing confidence and enthusiasm. The specific trigger for Amanda's emotional reaction would not become clear until much later, but the visible signs of her agitation had been unmistakable to anyone observing her body language and facial expressions during Emma's presentation. When Emma completed her reading to enthusiastic applause from the classroom audience, she had turned toward Amanda with obvious expectation of approval and praise from her aunt. The moment that followed would become permanently etched in my memory as the point when I finally understood the true nature of my family's feelings toward my daughter and our life circumstances. Amanda had looked directly at Emma and stated, loudly enough for the entire classroom to hear, that showing off was inappropriate behavior that made other children feel bad about themselves. She had then raised her hand and struck Emma across the face with sufficient force to leave a visible red mark on her cheek and knock her slightly off balance. The classroom had fallen into shocked silence as Emma stood frozen with confusion and humiliation, her hand pressed against her stinging cheek while tears formed in her eyes. Mrs. Rodriguez had immediately moved to comfort Emma while simultaneously addressing Amanda's completely inappropriate behavior with professional composure that barely concealed her outrage at witnessing an adult assault a child in her classroom. My own reaction had been delayed by sheer disbelief that my sister had physically struck my daughter in front of her classmates and teacher. The public nature of the assault had compounded the violation, as Emma's humiliation had been witnessed by everyone whose opinion mattered in her daily school environment. The betrayal had been both personal and social, damaging Emma's sense of safety within her own family, while potentially affecting her relationships with peers who had observed the incident. Amanda had offered no apology or explanation for her behavior, instead gathering her belongings and leaving the classroom while other parents and family members stood in stunned silence. Her departure had left me to manage the immediate aftermath of Emma's emotional distress while attempting to provide explanations to Mrs. Rodriguez and the other adults who had witnessed the assault. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The drive home from school had been conducted in heavy silence, with Emma withdrawn and confused about why her aunt had hurt her after she had worked so hard to read well for the classroom presentation. My attempts to provide comfort and reassurance had been complicated by my own shock and anger, as well as my uncertainty about how to explain Amanda's behavior in terms that a 7-year-old could understand without damaging her sense of family security. Marcus had been in Washington, D.C., attending a maritime security conference when the incident occurred, leaving me to navigate the immediate crisis alone while processing my own emotional responses to Amanda's assault on our daughter. The isolation had intensified my sense of vulnerability and confusion about how to respond appropriately to a situation that had no precedent in my experience or understanding of family relationships. This moment of crisis would mark the beginning of a transformation in my understanding of family loyalty, personal boundaries, and the protection that Emma deserved from the adults responsible for her well-being and security. The evening following the school incident found me sitting in Emma's bedroom, watching her sleep while struggling to process the magnitude of what had occurred. Her face still bore faint traces of the red mark where Amanda's hand had struck her, and she had asked 3 times during bedtime whether Aunt Amanda was angry with her for reading too well. The innocence of her questions had cut through my heart like shards of glass, as I realized that my 7-year-old daughter was blaming herself for an adult's inexcusable behavior. Marcus was scheduled to return from Washington at 11 o'clock that evening, and I had spent hours rehearsing how to explain the day's events without allowing my own emotional turmoil to overshadow the facts of what had occurred. The incident demanded a clear, rational response that would protect Emma while addressing the broader pattern of dysfunction that had been festering within my extended family for years. I had attempted to contact Amanda throughout the afternoon, hoping to secure some form of explanation or apology that might help Emma understand that the assault had not been her fault. However, Amanda had ignored my calls and text messages, leaving me to wonder whether her silence reflected shame about her behavior or defiance about potential consequences for her actions. My mother had also proven unreachable, which surprised me given her typical pattern of maintaining constant communication about minor issues and daily activities. The absence of contact from both Amanda and Mom suggested either coordination in avoiding accountability or a level of family dysfunction that exceeded even my previous understanding of their relationship dynamics. Mrs. Rodriguez had called during the late afternoon to check on Emma's emotional state and to inform me that she would be required to file an incident report with the school administration regarding the assault that had occurred during the classroom event. Her professional obligation to document the incident would create an official record of Amanda's behavior, potentially triggering intervention from Child Protective Services or other authorities charged with investigating threats to student safety. The prospect of external agency involvement had added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. While I supported any measures necessary to protect Emma and other children from similar incidents, I also recognized that formal investigations could expose our family's private struggles to public scrutiny and professional judgment that might affect Marcus's career and our standing within the military community. Emma's bedtime routine had required careful navigation around her questions about family relationships and her own role in triggering Amanda's violent reaction. Her developmental understanding of cause and effect naturally led her to assume responsibility for adult behavior that followed her actions, even when those adult responses were completely inappropriate and unpredictable. I had provided reassurance about Emma's innocence while avoiding detailed explanations of Amanda's psychological issues that would be inappropriate for a 7-year-old's comprehension level. The balance between honesty and age-appropriate information had proven challenging, particularly when Emma's questions revealed her sophisticated thinking about family dynamics and personal responsibility. Marcus arrived home precisely at 11:15, his travel efficiency reflecting the disciplined approach to logistics and time management that had characterized his military career and corporate leadership style. His immediate inquiry about our day's activities provided an opening for me to present a factual account of the school incident, without dramatic embellishment or emotional interpretation that might cloud his understanding of the situation's severity. I had prepared a chronological summary of events that began with Amanda's arrival at our house and concluded with Emma's bedtime questions about her aunt's anger toward her reading performance. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression shifting from mild concern to controlled fury as I described Amanda's physical assault on Emma in front of her classmates and teacher. Marcus's military training had taught him to process shocking information without allowing emotional reactions to interfere with strategic thinking and appropriate response planning. However, the combination of an attack on his daughter and the public humiliation she had endured clearly tested his professional composure and self-discipline. His first questions focused on Emma's physical and emotional condition, her understanding of the incident, and the steps I had taken to provide comfort and security following the assault. His priority on our daughter's well-being reflected his fundamental values about family protection and parental responsibility that had guided his approach to both military service and corporate leadership. Marcus's second area of inquiry concerned the official consequences that would result from Mrs. Rodriguez's incident report and the school administration's obligation to investigate threats to student safety. His understanding of institutional procedures and legal requirements enabled him to anticipate potential complications that might arise from external agency involvement in our family's private matters. His third focus involved Amanda's current location, her pattern of communication avoidance, and my family's history of crisis management that might predict their likely responses to accountability demands. Marcus had observed my family's dysfunction during our 8-year marriage, but had previously respected my requests to handle their issues independently, without direct intervention from him. The conversation that followed would fundamentally alter our approach to managing my extended family's impact on our household and Emma's security. Marcus explained that his tolerance for their manipulation and financial exploitation had been based on his assumption that their behavior, while problematic, did not pose direct threats to Emma's safety or emotional development. Amanda's physical assault had crossed a line that triggered Marcus's protective instincts, as both a father and a leader accustomed to confronting threats with decisive action. His military background had taught him that allowing aggressive behavior to proceed without consequences inevitably led to escalation and increased danger for those under his protection. Marcus's corporate experience had also provided him with extensive knowledge about managing personnel who demonstrated poor judgment, violated professional standards, or created liability risks for organizations and colleagues. His approach to addressing problematic behavior emphasized clear communication of expectations, consistent enforcement of boundaries, and swift intervention when behavior threatened organizational safety or effectiveness. The combination of his military and corporate expertise had equipped Marcus with both the authority and the skills necessary to address my family's dysfunction in ways that I had never considered or attempted. His perspective on the situation differed fundamentally from my own approach, which had emphasized accommodation, compromise, and conflict avoidance that had enabled increasingly destructive behavior patterns. Marcus proposed an immediate response strategy that would address both the specific incident involving Emma and the broader pattern of manipulation that had characterized my family's relationship with our household for years. His plan involved direct communication with Amanda and my mother that would establish clear boundaries and consequences for future behavior while providing opportunities for them to demonstrate accountability and commitment to change. However, Marcus also emphasized that his intervention would occur only with my complete agreement and active participation. He recognized that my relationship with my family was complex and emotionally significant, and he refused to take unilateral action that might damage those connections permanently without my informed consent and strategic partnership. The discussion that followed required me to confront uncomfortable realities about my family's treatment of Emma and our household that I had been avoiding or minimizing for years. Marcus's questions forced me to acknowledge that the financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and constant crisis creation had been gradually escalating toward more serious violations of our family's boundaries and security. I realized that my attempts to protect my extended family from consequences for their behavior had inadvertently enabled increasingly destructive patterns that were now threatening Emma's safety and emotional development. My conflict avoidance and financial accommodation had communicated acceptance of treatment that Marcus correctly identified as unacceptable for any family claiming to love and respect us. The decision to authorize Marcus's intervention represented a fundamental shift in my approach to family relationships and personal boundaries. For years, I had operated under the assumption that family loyalty required endless tolerance for dysfunction, and that setting limits on behavior or financial support represented selfishness and abandonment of people who needed my help. Marcus's perspective challenged these assumptions by emphasizing that true family relationships were based on mutual respect, consideration for boundaries, and commitment to each member's well-being and security. His definition of family loyalty included the obligation to protect Emma from adults whose behavior demonstrated disregard for her safety and emotional needs. The conversation concluded with our agreement that Marcus would contact Amanda and my mother the following morning to address the school incident directly and establish clear expectations for future interactions with our family. His communication would be professional but firm, reflecting both his authority as Emma's father and his expertise in managing personnel who had violated professional standards. Marcus also proposed that we schedule a family meeting within the next week that would provide Amanda and my mother with opportunities to demonstrate accountability for the school incident, while discussing sustainable approaches to their financial and emotional needs that did not require constant crisis management from our household. The prospect of direct confrontation with my family generated significant anxiety, as I had spent years avoiding conflicts that might threaten our relationships or expose the extent of their dysfunction to external judgment. However, I also felt relief at the possibility that someone with Marcus's skills and authority might finally address behavior patterns that had been undermining our family's peace and security for years. Emma's safety had become the non-negotiable priority that provided clarity and determination for decisions that would have seemed impossible to make based solely on my own comfort and well-being. The realization that my accommodation of dysfunction had potentially exposed my daughter to harm created motivation for change that exceeded my previous conflict avoidance and family loyalty concerns. The following morning began with Marcus's preparation for conversations that would require careful balance between firmness and respect, accountability and relationship preservation. His military and corporate experience had taught him that effective confrontation involved clear communication of standards and consequences, while providing opportunities for individuals to demonstrate commitment to meeting those standards. Marcus's approach emphasized facts rather than emotions, specific behaviors rather than character judgments, and future expectations rather than past grievances. His goal was to create understanding about acceptable behavior standards, while providing pathways for Amanda and my mother to maintain relationships with our family through demonstrated respect for our boundaries and Emma's well-being. The first conversation occurred at 8 o'clock in the morning, when Marcus called Amanda to address the school incident directly and establish expectations for future interactions with our family. His tone was professional but unmistakably serious, reflecting his authority as both Emma's father and a leader accustomed to addressing violations of acceptable behavior standards. Marcus's conversation with Amanda lasted approximately 20 minutes and covered several key areas that would determine the future of her relationship with our family. He began by describing the school incident from Emma's perspective, emphasizing the confusion and humiliation that a 7-year-old child had experienced when an adult family member physically assaulted her for demonstrating academic excellence. Amanda's response to Marcus's account revealed attitudes and resentments that provided disturbing insights into her motivations for striking Emma during the classroom reading event. Her explanation would expose family dynamics that had been hidden beneath years of manipulation and crisis creation, finally revealing the true nature of my extended family's feelings toward our success and Emma's achievements. The revelations that emerged from Marcus's conversations with Amanda and my mother would transform my understanding of family relationships, while providing the clarity necessary to establish boundaries that would protect Emma's security and our household's stability for years to come. Amanda's response to Marcus's direct questioning revealed a depth of resentment and calculated malice that shattered every assumption I had maintained about my family's motivations and feelings toward our household. As I listened to Marcus relay her words during his phone conversation that morning, I experienced the devastating realization that years of financial support and emotional accommodation had been met not with gratitude, but with bitter envy and active hostility toward Emma's advantages and achievements. Marcus had begun his conversation with Amanda by requesting an explanation for her behavior during the school reading event, emphasizing that physical assault against a child was unacceptable under any circumstances and required immediate accountability. His tone remained professional but firm, reflecting his expectation that Amanda would provide a genuine apology and demonstrate understanding of the severity of her actions. Instead, Amanda's response had been defiant and revealing in ways that exposed the toxic mindset that had driven her assault on Emma. She had stated, without apparent shame or recognition of her words' implications, that Emma's performance during the reading event had been designed to show off and make other children feel inadequate about their own abilities. According to Amanda's perspective, Emma's academic excellence represented arrogance and superiority that deserved correction through public humiliation. Amanda had continued her explanation by expressing resentment about Emma's educational advantages, private tutoring opportunities, and access to advanced learning resources that other children in the classroom did not possess. Her words revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship between parental investment in education and student achievement, as well as a disturbing willingness to punish a child for benefits provided by responsible adults. The conversation had taken an even more shocking turn when Amanda began discussing the financial disparity between our households and her perception that Emma's advantages had been purchased through resources that should have been shared more equally among family members. Her comments revealed that she viewed our monthly financial contributions not as generous assistance, but as insufficient compensation for what she considered her rightful share of our family's prosperity. Marcus's military training in interrogation and personnel evaluation had enabled him to recognize that Amanda's explanations were revealing deeper issues than simple impulse control or momentary frustration. Her systematic presentation of grievances suggested long-standing resentment and careful consideration of her hostility toward Emma's success and our family's stability. When Marcus pressed for specific details about Amanda's motivations for striking Emma, her response had crossed into territory that revealed the true extent of her psychological dysfunction and malicious intent. She had admitted that watching Emma receive praise and recognition for her reading performance had triggered anger about the unfairness of some children receiving better opportunities than others, and that her physical response had been intended to teach Emma humility about her privileged circumstances. Amanda's explanation demonstrated a profound lack of understanding about child development, educational achievement, and appropriate adult behavior that went beyond simple poor judgment into territory that suggested genuine psychological instability. Her willingness to harm a 7-year-old child to address her own feelings of inadequacy and resentment revealed character defects that posed ongoing threats to Emma's safety and emotional well-being. The most disturbing revelation had emerged when Marcus inquired about Amanda's expectations for future interactions with our family and her understanding of the consequences that would result from her assault on Emma. Rather than expressing remorse or commitment to behavioral change, Amanda had indicated that she considered her actions justified and that Emma needed to learn that her advantages in life should not make her arrogant or insensitive to others who possessed fewer opportunities. Marcus's conversation with Amanda had concluded with his clear communication that physical violence against Emma would not be tolerated under any circumstances, and that future contact with our family would require demonstrated accountability for her behavior and commitment to respecting our boundaries. Amanda's response had been dismissive and angry, suggesting that Marcus was overreacting to a minor disciplinary action that had been necessary to correct Emma's inappropriate behavior. The phone conversation with my mother had provided even more shocking insights into the family dynamics that had been operating beneath the surface of our relationships for years. When Marcus explained the school incident and requested Eleanor's perspective on Amanda's behavior, her response had revealed levels of support for the assault that demonstrated how deeply the toxic attitudes had penetrated their shared worldview. Eleanor had defended Amanda's actions by explaining that Emma's academic performance often made other children feel bad about themselves, and that someone needed to teach her appropriate humility about her advantages in life. According to my mother's perspective, Emma's confidence and enthusiasm about learning represented character flaws that required correction through public embarrassment and physical discipline. The conversation had revealed that Eleanor and Amanda had been discussing Emma's problematic behavior for months, with particular focus on her academic achievements, extracurricular activities, and general confidence that they interpreted as arrogance and superiority. Their shared resentment about Emma's advantages had apparently been festering and growing more intense as Emma continued to excel in school and demonstrate the benefits of the educational investment that Marcus and I had prioritized. Eleanor's comments had also exposed financial motivations that explained much of their hostility toward our family's success and Emma's opportunities. She had expressed frustration that our monthly contributions to their household expenses had not increased proportionally with Marcus's corporate advancement and our improved financial circumstances. According to her calculations, our assistance should have reflected a larger percentage of our income and provided more substantial lifestyle improvements for their benefit. The revelation that my mother and sister had been calculating the value of our financial assistance against our overall prosperity, rather than appreciating our voluntary support during their difficulties, fundamentally altered my understanding of their motivations and character. Their attitude suggested that they viewed our success as something that belonged partially to them, and that Emma's advantages represented resources that had been diverted from their rightful claims. Marcus's conversation with Eleanor had included direct questions about her knowledge of Amanda's intentions during the school visit, and whether the assault on Emma had been planned or discussed in advance. Eleanor's responses had been evasive but suggested that she had been aware of Amanda's growing resentment toward Emma and had not discouraged her sister from expressing those feelings during the classroom event. The possibility that Emma's assault had been premeditated rather than impulsive added another dimension of betrayal that made the incident even more disturbing and threatening. The realization that my mother and sister had potentially conspired to humiliate and harm my daughter during a school event revealed levels of malice that exceeded my previous understanding of their dysfunction. Eleanor's conversation with Marcus had concluded with her demand that we continue our monthly financial contributions, while accepting that Amanda's disciplinary actions toward Emma had been appropriate and necessary. Her complete lack of accountability for the assault, combined with her expectation that we would maintain financial support while tolerating physical violence against our daughter, demonstrated the extent of her psychological disconnection from reality and appropriate family relationships. The morning's conversations had provided Marcus with comprehensive understanding of the attitudes and motivations that had driven Amanda's assault on Emma, while revealing the broader family dynamics that had been operating beneath the surface of our relationships. The information gathered during these discussions would inform our strategic response to protect Emma, while addressing the ongoing threats posed by my extended family's dysfunction. Marcus's analysis of the conversations had identified several key concerns that required immediate attention and long-term strategic planning. The first priority involved ensuring Emma's physical and emotional safety through establishment of clear boundaries that would prevent future contact between her and adults who had demonstrated willingness to harm her for their own psychological gratification. The second concern focused on the financial manipulation that had been operating for years through my family's exploitation of guilt and obligation to secure resources that they considered their rightful inheritance from our prosperity. Marcus recognized that continuing financial support would communicate acceptance of their behavior while providing resources that enabled their dysfunction and hostility toward our family. The third area of concern involved the potential for escalation in their behavior, as we established boundaries and reduced their access to our financial resources and emotional energy. Marcus's experience with personnel management had taught him that individuals who possessed manipulative and exploitative tendencies often responded to accountability measures with increased aggression and more sophisticated attempts at control and retaliation. Marcus had also identified the need for documentation and external support systems that would provide protection and evidence if my family's response to boundaries included threats, harassment, or attempts to involve external agencies in manufactured crises designed to restore their access to our resources and control over our household decisions. The conversation that followed Marcus's phone calls required me to confront the reality that my family's treatment of Emma and our household had been driven by calculated malice rather than simple dysfunction or temporary stress. The revelation that they viewed Emma's success as a threat to their own status and our prosperity as resources that belonged partially to them forced me to reevaluate every interaction and financial contribution that had occurred over the previous years. I realized that my attempts to maintain family harmony through accommodation and financial support had been interpreted as weakness and evidence that pressure and manipulation were effective strategies for securing resources in compliance with their demands. My conflict avoidance had communicated that their behavior was acceptable and that our boundaries were negotiable based on their emotional pressure and crisis creation. The most painful realization involved recognizing that Emma had been targeted for assault, not because of any inappropriate behavior on her part, but because her achievements and confidence represented everything that my family resented about our circumstances and choices. Amanda's physical attack had been intended to damage Emma's self-esteem and academic enthusiasm, while demonstrating their power to harm her when they felt that our family's success had exceeded appropriate limits. Marcus's strategic assessment of our situation had identified the need for immediate action to protect Emma, while establishing consequences that would demonstrate the seriousness of our commitment to maintaining boundaries. His plan involved several components that would address both the immediate threats and the long-term patterns that had enabled their destructive behavior. The first element of Marcus's strategy involved complete cessation of all financial contributions to my mother and Amanda, effective immediately. His analysis indicated that continuing financial support would communicate acceptance of their behavior, while providing resources that enabled their hostility and sense of entitlement toward our family's prosperity. The second component required formal communication that documented their behavior and established clear expectations for any future contact with our family. Marcus's corporate and military experience had taught him the importance of creating written records that could provide evidence and protection if legal intervention became necessary. The third element involved implementing security measures that would protect our household from potential retaliation, while providing Emma with confidence that adults who had demonstrated willingness to harm her would not have access to our home or her school environment. Marcus had also proposed engaging professional support services that would provide Emma with counseling resources to process the trauma of her assault, while helping her understand that adult behavior toward her had reflected their problems rather than any deficiency in her character or achievements. The decision to implement Marcus's comprehensive response strategy represented a fundamental transformation in my approach to family relationships and personal boundaries. For the first time in my adult life, I was prioritizing my immediate family's safety and well-being over my extended family's comfort and financial security. The change required me to overcome years of conditioning that had taught me to absorb abuse and exploitation in the name of family loyalty, while accepting that love and support were contingent on my willingness to provide unlimited resources and accommodation for dysfunction. Marcus's perspective had shown me that true family relationships were based on mutual respect and consideration, rather than one-sided sacrifice and endless tolerance for harmful behavior. The transformation also involved recognizing that Emma deserved protection from adults whose behavior demonstrated disregard for her safety and emotional development, regardless of their family relationships or claims to love and concern for her well-being. My role as her mother required me to establish boundaries that would prevent future harm, while providing her with examples of healthy relationship dynamics and appropriate responses to unacceptable behavior. The implementation of Marcus's comprehensive response strategy began immediately following his disturbing conversations with Amanda and Eleanor. His approach reflected the systematic planning and decisive execution that had characterized his successful military career and corporate leadership, adapted specifically to address the unique challenges posed by family dysfunction and the protection of our daughter's well-being. Marcus had scheduled the remainder of his morning to focus exclusively on establishing the framework that would govern all future interactions between our household and my extended family. His first action involved drafting formal correspondence that would document the school incident, communicate our response to their behavior, and establish clear expectations for any potential future contact with our family members. The letter Marcus composed demonstrated his expertise in professional communication that balanced firmness with appropriate legal and ethical considerations. He began by providing a factual account of Amanda's assault on Emma during the school reading event, including specific details about the physical violence, the public nature of the humiliation, and the emotional impact on a 7-year-old child who had been attacked by a trusted family member. Marcus's documentation included direct quotes from his conversations with both Amanda and Eleanor, particularly their statements defending the assault as appropriate discipline and their expressions of resentment toward Emma's academic achievements and our family's prosperity. These quotes would serve as evidence of their attitudes and intentions while providing protection against potential attempts to misrepresent their behavior or motivations in future disputes. The letter continued with a clear statement of consequences that would result from their behavior, beginning with the immediate cessation of all financial contributions to their household expenses, and continuing with restrictions on their access to our home, our daughter, and our personal information. Marcus emphasized that these measures were direct responses to their demonstrated disregard for Emma's safety and their exploitation of our previous generosity and accommodation. Marcus had also included specific language that addressed their attempts to justify Amanda's behavior through claims about Emma's need for humility and discipline. His response made clear that no justification existed for physical violence against a child, and that their attitudes toward Emma's success revealed character defects that posed ongoing threats to her emotional and physical well-being. The formal communication concluded with Marcus's professional credentials and contact information, establishing his authority as both Emma's father and a senior executive with extensive experience in organizational leadership and personnel management. His signature block included his titles as Rear Admiral, United States Coast Guard, retired, and Chief Executive Officer of Atlantic Maritime Solutions, communicating his status and resources in terms that would discourage attempts at retaliation or manipulation. Marcus had arranged for the letter to be delivered through certified mail with return receipt requested, ensuring that Amanda and Eleanor would receive the communication while providing documentation of their acknowledgement for potential future legal proceedings. His attention to procedural details reflected his understanding that family conflicts involving child safety often required formal documentation and evidence preservation. The second component of Marcus's strategy involved immediate implementation of financial boundaries that would demonstrate the serious consequences of their behavior, while eliminating their access to resources that had enabled their hostility and sense of entitlement. His analysis had revealed that our monthly contributions totaling nearly $3,000 had been interpreted as insufficient compensation for their perceived claims on our prosperity rather than generous assistance during their financial difficulties. Marcus accessed our banking systems to cancel all automatic transfers and payment authorizations that had provided monthly support to Eleanor's household expenses. His review of our financial records revealed that our total contributions over the previous 3 years had exceeded $100,000, representing substantial resources that had been provided voluntarily, while receiving only manipulation and resentment in return. The cancellation of financial support would create immediate pressure on Amanda and Eleanor to address their own circumstances through employment, reduced expenses, or alternative assistance sources, rather than depending on exploitation of family relationships. Marcus recognized that their financial independence was essential for establishing healthy boundaries and eliminating their incentives for continued manipulation and crisis creation. Marcus had also implemented monitoring systems for our financial accounts that would detect and prevent any unauthorized access or fraudulent activity that might result from their knowledge of our personal information and banking relationships. His corporate experience had taught him that individuals who had become accustomed to accessing resources through manipulation often escalated to more aggressive methods when their previous strategies became ineffective. The third element of Marcus's comprehensive response involved establishing physical security measures that would protect our household from potential retaliation, while providing Emma with confidence that adults who had demonstrated willingness to harm her would not have access to our home environment. His military background had provided extensive knowledge about threat assessment and security planning that could be adapted to civilian circumstances. Marcus contacted our neighborhood security service to implement enhanced monitoring of our property and to establish protocols for responding to unwanted visitors or suspicious activity near our home. His explanation of the family conflict and potential for escalation prompted immediate upgrades to our alarm systems and communication procedures that would provide rapid response capabilities if threatening behavior occurred. The security measures also included coordination with Emma's school administration to ensure that Amanda and Eleanor would not have access to school grounds or information about Emma's academic activities and schedule. Marcus's conversation with the principal had resulted in formal documentation of the assault incident and implementation of visitor restrictions that would prevent future contact between Emma and adults who had demonstrated potential for harmful behavior. Marcus had arranged for Emma to receive counseling support from a child psychologist who specialized in helping children process traumatic experiences involving family relationships. His recognition that Emma's emotional well-being required professional attention demonstrated his commitment to addressing both the immediate and long-term effects of her assault, while providing her with resources to understand that adult behavior toward her had reflected their problems, rather than any deficiency in her character. The counseling arrangement included family sessions that would help Emma understand appropriate boundaries in relationships, while reinforcing that her academic achievements and personal confidence were positive qualities that deserved celebration rather than punishment. Marcus's involvement in these sessions would provide Emma with consistent messaging about family values and expectations, while strengthening their father-daughter relationship through shared commitment to her emotional healing. Marcus's strategy also included consultation with family law attorneys who could provide guidance about legal protections and potential consequences if Amanda or Eleanor's behavior escalated to include threats, harassment, or attempts to involve external agencies in manufactured crises designed to restore their access to our resources. His corporate experience had taught him that preventing problems through appropriate preparation was more effective than responding to crises after they developed. The legal consultation had resulted in documentation of the assault incident and our family's response, creating formal records that could support restraining orders or other protective measures if future behavior warranted such interventions. Marcus's proactive approach to legal preparation demonstrated his commitment to protecting our family through all available means, while avoiding unnecessary escalation if boundaries and consequences proved sufficient to modify their behavior. The fourth component of Marcus's strategy involved communication with our extended social and professional networks to ensure that accurate information about the family conflict would be available if Amanda or Eleanor attempted to manipulate others through false narratives or requests for intervention on their behalf. His experience in organizational leadership had taught him that controlling information flow was essential for preventing manipulation and maintaining credibility during conflicts. Marcus had contacted key family friends, military colleagues, and corporate associates who might be approached by Amanda or Eleanor, seeking support or attempting to pressure us to restore financial assistance and family contact. His brief explanations of the assault incident and our protective response had generated universal support for our position, while eliminating potential avenues for manipulation through third-party pressure. The communication strategy also included coordination with my professional colleagues and Emma's educational community to ensure that accurate information would be available if attempts were made to interfere with my career or Emma's school experience through false accusations or manufactured crises. Marcus's systematic approach to information management reflected his understanding that family conflicts often expanded beyond immediate participants when manipulation and retaliation were involved. The implementation of Marcus's comprehensive strategy had been completed within 48 hours of the school incident, demonstrating the effectiveness of systematic planning and decisive execution in addressing complex family conflicts. His approach had transformed a crisis situation into an opportunity to establish healthy boundaries while protecting Emma from further harm and exploitation. The immediate effects of our strategic response became apparent through Amanda and Eleanor's attempts to contact us following their receipt of Marcus's formal letter and their discovery that financial support had been terminated. Their initial communications revealed shock and anger about consequences they had not anticipated, suggesting that they had expected our accommodation and financial assistance to continue despite their assault on Emma and hostile attitudes toward our family. Amanda's first response involved angry phone calls and text messages, demanding restoration of financial support while denying that her behavior toward Emma had been inappropriate or harmful. Her communications revealed continued lack of accountability for the assault, while demonstrating the entitled attitudes that had driven years of manipulation and exploitation of our family's generosity and conflict avoidance. Eleanor's communications focused on attempts to negotiate modified arrangements that would restore partial financial support while minimizing their accountability for Amanda's behavior and their shared hostility toward Emma's success. Her approach reflected sophisticated manipulation strategies designed to exploit family loyalty and guilt, while avoiding genuine acknowledgement of the harm they had caused. The pattern of their responses confirmed Marcus's assessment that boundaries and consequences were necessary to protect our family from ongoing manipulation and potential escalation of harmful behavior. Their focus on restoring access to our resources rather than demonstrating accountability for their actions revealed that their primary concern involved maintaining financial benefits, rather than preserving family relationships through appropriate behavior modification. Marcus's monitoring of their communications had also revealed coordination between Amanda and Eleanor in developing strategies to pressure us through alternative approaches, including attempts to involve other family members and community contacts in their efforts to restore financial support and eliminate consequences for their behavior. Their collaborative manipulation confirmed that the assault on Emma had been consistent with broader patterns of exploitation, rather than an isolated incident. The effectiveness of Marcus's strategic response was demonstrated through the rapid establishment of stability and security within our household, while eliminating the constant stress and crisis management that had characterized our previous relationship with my extended family. Emma's emotional recovery had progressed more quickly than anticipated, aided by the clear messaging that her safety was our highest priority, and that appropriate consequences had been implemented to prevent future harm. The transformation in our family dynamics had created opportunities for Emma to express her feelings about the assault and her confusion about adult behavior that had targeted her for achievements that we celebrated and encouraged. Her discussions during counseling sessions revealed sophisticated understanding of relationship dynamics while reinforcing her confidence in our protection and support for her continued academic and personal development. Marcus's leadership during this crisis had demonstrated the power of systematic planning, clear communication, and decisive action in addressing complex family conflicts while protecting vulnerable family members from harm. His approach had transformed a traumatic incident into an opportunity for strengthening our immediate family relationships, while establishing sustainable boundaries with extended family members whose behavior had proven destructive and threatening. The success of our strategic response had provided a foundation for future decision-making that prioritized Emma's well-being and our family's stability over accommodation of dysfunction and exploitation. Marcus's intervention had created space for genuine healing and growth, while eliminating the constant pressure and manipulation that had undermined our peace and security for years. The systematic escalation of Amanda and Eleanor's behavior following the implementation of our protective boundaries demonstrated precisely the pattern of retaliation that Marcus had anticipated through his professional experience with problematic personnel and organizational dysfunction. Their response confirmed that our strategic approach had been necessary and appropriate, while validating the importance of comprehensive preparation for managing family conflicts that involved manipulative and potentially dangerous individuals. Within 72 hours of receiving Marcus's formal correspondence, Amanda and Eleanor had initiated a coordinated campaign designed to pressure us into restoring financial support, while eliminating consequences for their behavior toward Emma. Their approach revealed sophisticated understanding of manipulation strategies combined with complete disregard for the legitimate concerns that had motivated our protective measures. The first phase of their escalation involved systematic contact with extended family members, longtime family friends, and community acquaintances who possessed historical relationships with our family, but limited knowledge about the specific circumstances that had led to our decision to establish boundaries. Amanda and Eleanor presented carefully crafted narratives that portrayed them as victims of sudden and unreasonable abandonment, while omitting all references to the assault on Emma or their hostile attitudes toward our family's success. Their version of events emphasized our alleged selfishness and ingratitude for family support during earlier periods of our lives, particularly focusing on emotional assistance they claimed to have provided during Marcus's military deployments and career transitions. Their selective presentation of historical information was designed to generate sympathy and external pressure for reconciliation, without acknowledging the specific behaviors that had necessitated our protective response. The manipulation campaign also included strategic appeals to religious and community leaders who had known our family during different periods of our lives. Amanda and Eleanor presented themselves as devastated family members who had been rejected despite their love and concern for Emma's development and our family's well-being. Their communications emphasized themes of forgiveness, family unity, and Christian charity, while completely avoiding accountability for the circumstances that had prompted our decision to establish protective boundaries. Marcus's preparation for this predictable escalation had included proactive communication with key individuals who might be approached during such a campaign. His brief explanations of the assault incident and our protective response had generated universal support for our position, while eliminating the effectiveness of manipulation attempts that relied on incomplete or false information about our family's circumstances. The second phase of their escalation involved direct attempts to circumvent our boundaries through unauthorized contact with Emma's school, our neighborhood security service, and Marcus's corporate offices. These attempts revealed increasing desperation and willingness to create professional complications for Marcus while potentially endangering Emma's safety through violation of the protective measures we had established. Amanda had contacted Riverside Elementary School, claiming to be concerned about Emma's emotional well-being following what she described as family difficulties that were affecting her educational experience. Her communication with school personnel had attempted to portray our protective boundaries as evidence of family dysfunction, while requesting information about Emma's academic performance and behavior that could be used to support claims about negative effects of our decision-making. The school's response to Amanda's contact had demonstrated the effectiveness of Marcus's proactive coordination with educational authorities. The principal and Emma's teacher had been prepared for such attempts and had refused to provide any information, while documenting Amanda's unauthorized contact for potential future reference. Their professional handling of the situation had protected Emma's privacy while reinforcing the appropriateness of the protective measures we had implemented. Eleanor had attempted to contact Marcus's corporate offices, claiming to be a family member with urgent concerns about his well-being and decision-making capacity. Her communication with Atlantic Maritime Solutions personnel had suggested that Marcus was experiencing personal difficulties that were affecting his judgment and creating problems for family relationships that required external intervention or support. Marcus's corporate experience had prepared him for such attempts at professional sabotage, and his advance notification to key personnel about potential family-related contact had prevented any disruption to his professional responsibilities or reputation. His colleagues' understanding of the situation had enabled them to respond appropriately while documenting Eleanor's attempts for potential future legal proceedings. The third phase of escalation involved more aggressive tactics that revealed the extent of Amanda and Eleanor's desperation and their willingness to create serious consequences for our family in their attempts to restore access to our resources and eliminate accountability for their behavior. Their escalated approach confirmed Marcus's assessment that boundaries and consequences were essential for protecting our family from individuals whose behavior demonstrated increasing instability and disregard for appropriate limits. Amanda had begun making frequent unannounced visits to our neighborhood, parking near our home for extended periods while apparently observing our daily routines and activities. Her surveillance behavior had been detected by our enhanced security monitoring and had prompted immediate coordination with local law enforcement to document potential stalking activity that could warrant formal intervention. The surveillance activity had created additional stress for Emma, who had observed Amanda's vehicle from our home windows and had asked questions about why her aunt was watching our house without visiting or communicating with us directly. Marcus's response had emphasized that Amanda's behavior reflected her problems rather than any action by our family, while reinforcing Emma's understanding that appropriate adults respected boundaries and privacy. Eleanor had escalated her tactics to include contact with Child Protective Services, claiming concerns about Emma's well-being and alleging that our family's decision to limit contact with extended family represented isolation and potential neglect that required official investigation. Her false report had been carefully crafted to trigger mandatory investigation procedures, while avoiding specific claims that could be easily disproven or result in consequences for filing false reports. Marcus's legal preparation had anticipated this possibility, and his documentation of the assault incident and our protective response had provided Child Protective Services with comprehensive information about the legitimate circumstances that had motivated our boundaries. The investigating caseworker had quickly determined that Eleanor's report lacked merit, while noting concerns about her motivations for attempting to involve governmental agencies in family disputes. The investigation process had required significant time and emotional energy while creating temporary stress for Emma, who had been required to participate in interviews designed to assess her safety and well-being. However, the thorough documentation that Marcus had prepared had enabled rapid resolution of the false allegations while establishing official records that would protect us from future attempts at manipulation through governmental agencies. The fourth phase of escalation had involved attempts to create financial and legal complications through false claims and frivolous disputes designed to drain our resources and attention while pressuring us to negotiate restoration of previous arrangements. Amanda and Eleanor's coordination in these efforts revealed planning and consultation that suggested external advice from individuals experienced in manipulation and retaliation strategies. Eleanor had disputed several years of financial transactions between our households, claiming that previous transfers had been loans rather than gifts, and demanding immediate repayment with interest calculated from the original transaction dates. Her documentation of these claims had been carefully prepared with legal formatting designed to create the appearance of legitimate financial disputes requiring formal resolution. Marcus's financial record-keeping had included comprehensive documentation of all transfers as voluntary gifts, with clear communication about their charitable nature and absence of repayment obligations. His corporate experience with financial disputes had prepared him to respond effectively, while avoiding costly legal proceedings that would have achieved Eleanor's goal of creating burdensome complications for our family. Amanda had filed complaints with local business licensing authorities claiming that Marcus's corporate position created conflicts of interest that violated professional ethics standards and regulatory requirements. Her allegations had been specifically designed to create professional investigations that would require Marcus's time and attention while potentially affecting his corporate reputation and advancement opportunities. The frivolous nature of Amanda's complaints had become apparent immediately to the investigating authorities, who had determined that her allegations lacked factual basis and appeared to be motivated by personal disputes rather than legitimate regulatory concerns. However, the investigation process had required formal responses and documentation that had consumed valuable time and resources while demonstrating Amanda's willingness to weaponize official processes for personal retaliation. Marcus's response to these escalated tactics had demonstrated the effectiveness of comprehensive preparation and systematic documentation in protecting families from sophisticated manipulation and retaliation campaigns. His military and corporate experience had provided the knowledge and resources necessary to anticipate and neutralize attempts at professional sabotage, while maintaining focus on Emma's protection and our family's stability. The escalation pattern had also revealed important information about Amanda and Eleanor's psychological state and their commitment to continued harassment despite clear communication about boundaries and consequences. Their willingness to involve external agencies, create false allegations, and attempt professional sabotage demonstrated levels of hostility and instability that confirmed the appropriateness of our protective measures, while indicating potential need for additional security precautions. Marcus's analysis of their behavior had identified concerning patterns that suggested potential for further escalation if their current tactics failed to achieve restoration of financial access and elimination of accountability for their actions. His assessment indicated need for continued vigilance and preparation for more aggressive attempts at retaliation, while maintaining commitment to Emma's protection and our family's boundaries. The effectiveness of our strategic response had been demonstrated through our ability to maintain stability and security, despite intensive pressure and manipulation attempts. Emma's continued emotional recovery and academic progress had validated our decision to prioritize her well-being over accommodation of dysfunction, while proving that appropriate boundaries could create space for healing and growth. Marcus's leadership during this extended crisis had provided powerful examples of how professional expertise and systematic planning could protect families from sophisticated manipulation while maintaining ethical standards and legal compliance. His approach had transformed what could have been a devastating family conflict into an opportunity for demonstrating the importance of principle-based decision-making and commitment to protecting vulnerable family members. The experience had also strengthened our marriage and family relationships through shared commitment to Emma's well-being and our common values about appropriate behavior and healthy boundaries. The external pressure had clarified our priorities while eliminating ambiguity about our willingness to protect our immediate family from harm regardless of the source or claimed justification for threatening behavior. Marcus's systematic documentation of all escalation attempts had created comprehensive records that would support future legal action if Amanda and Eleanor's behavior continued to threaten our family's safety and stability. His preparation had positioned us to respond effectively to continued harassment, while maintaining focus on positive development opportunities for Emma and our household. The resolution of each escalation attempt had demonstrated that appropriate preparation and professional response could neutralize sophisticated manipulation tactics while avoiding unnecessary conflict or legal complications. Marcus's approach had achieved our protective goals while maintaining ethical standards and legal compliance that would withstand scrutiny from any external authority or professional review. The success of our comprehensive strategy had provided foundation for long-term stability and security that would enable Emma to continue her development without fear of harassment or manipulation from adults whose behavior had proven harmful and threatening. Our experience had validated the importance of prioritizing family safety over accommodation of dysfunction, while demonstrating that appropriate boundaries could be established and maintained through systematic planning and decisive implementation. The systematic failure of Amanda and Eleanor's escalation campaigns began to generate consequences that would fundamentally alter their circumstances, while demonstrating the self-destructive nature of manipulation and retaliation strategies. Their investment of time, energy, and resources in attempting to restore financial access and eliminate accountability for their behavior had diverted attention from practical concerns that required immediate resolution, creating additional problems that compounded their existing difficulties. The most immediate consequence emerged from their neglect of basic financial management during the weeks they had devoted to harassment and manipulation attempts. The cessation of our monthly contributions had created budget shortfalls that required prompt adjustment through reduced expenses, increased income, or alternative assistance sources. However, Amanda and Eleanor had focused their efforts on restoring previous arrangements rather than developing sustainable solutions for their changed circumstances. Eleanor's mortgage payment had become overdue during the third week following termination of our financial support, generating penalty fees and formal notices from her lending institution about potential foreclosure proceedings. Her assumption that pressure tactics would quickly restore our contributions had prevented timely adjustment of her housing arrangements or exploration of refinancing options that might have accommodated her reduced income capacity. The mortgage delinquency had triggered additional financial complications that affected Eleanor's credit rating and created obstacles for securing alternative financing or assistance programs. Her pattern of relying on external support rather than developing personal financial management skills had left her unprepared to navigate these challenges independently, resulting in cascading problems that threatened her housing stability. Amanda's rental situation had deteriorated even more rapidly due to her complete dependence on our monthly contributions for basic living expenses. Her landlord had initiated eviction proceedings within 2 weeks of her first missed payment, and her lack of employment history or financial reserves had eliminated options for negotiating extended payment arrangements or securing alternative housing. The prospect of homelessness had intensified Amanda's desperation while demonstrating the consequences of choosing manipulation over personal responsibility and productive activity. Her investment of energy in harassment campaigns had prevented job searching or skill development that might have created income opportunities to replace the financial support she had lost through her assault on Emma. The legal complications generated by their false reports and frivolous complaints had also begun to create unexpected costs and consequences that further strained their limited resources. Eleanor's contact with Child Protective Services had been documented as a potentially false report, triggering review procedures that could result in penalties for misuse of governmental resources and interference with official investigations. Amanda's complaints against Marcus's professional activities had been determined to be frivolous and potentially malicious, generating formal responses from regulatory authorities that could result in sanctions for abuse of official processes. Her lack of understanding about legal consequences for false allegations had created additional problems while failing to achieve any meaningful pressure on our family's circumstances. The documentation of their harassment and stalking behavior had also attracted attention from law enforcement agencies that were required to investigate potential criminal activity and threats to family safety. Amanda's surveillance of our neighborhood had been reported by multiple residents who had observed her suspicious behavior, creating official records that could support restraining orders or other protective measures. The accumulation of official documentation about their behavior had established patterns that would affect their credibility and legal standing in any future disputes or proceedings. Their strategy of attempting to manipulate external authorities had backfired by creating formal records of their dishonesty, harassment, and potential criminal activity that would be available for reference in subsequent interactions with governmental agencies. Marcus's systematic response to each escalation attempt had demonstrated the effectiveness of professional documentation and legal compliance in neutralizing manipulation tactics while protecting our family from harm. His approach had transformed their attacks into evidence that supported our protective measures while creating consequences that discouraged continued harassment. The social consequences of their behavior had also begun to affect their relationships within their community and extended family network. Family members and friends who had initially been sympathetic to their claims of unfair treatment had gradually learned about the actual circumstances that had prompted our protective response, resulting in decreased support and increased criticism of their actions. Eleanor's attempts to mobilize religious and community support had been undermined by her dishonesty about the assault incident and her manipulation of sympathetic individuals who had invested time and emotional energy in attempting to mediate a conflict based on false information. The discovery of her deception had damaged her reputation and credibility within her social network, while generating resentment from people who felt manipulated and misled. Amanda's behavior toward Emma had become known within their extended family network, creating widespread disapproval and concern about her psychological stability and potential for future violence. Family members who had previously supported her during her employment difficulties and personal struggles had distanced themselves from someone whose behavior toward a child was viewed as unacceptable and potentially dangerous. The isolation that resulted from their social consequences had eliminated potential sources of emotional and financial support that might have helped them address their practical difficulties. Their decision to prioritize manipulation and retaliation over accountability and relationship repair had created additional problems while destroying resources that could have assisted their adjustment to changed circumstances. Meanwhile, the stability and security that our protective measures had created within our household had enabled Emma to demonstrate remarkable resilience and continued development, despite the traumatic experience of her assault. The clear messaging about her safety and our commitment to her protection had provided foundation for emotional recovery that exceeded our most optimistic expectations. Emma's academic performance had continued to excel following the school incident, with her confidence and enthusiasm for learning remaining strong despite the temporary disruption caused by Amanda's attack. Her teacher reported that Emma had shown no signs of anxiety or reluctance about classroom participation, indicating that our protective response had effectively prevented lasting damage to her educational engagement. The counseling sessions that Marcus had arranged had provided Emma with age-appropriate understanding of family dynamics and relationship boundaries, while reinforcing her comprehension that adult behavior toward her reflected their problems rather than any deficiency in her character or achievements. Her processing of the assault had demonstrated sophisticated emotional intelligence and resilience that validated our approach to supporting her recovery. Emma's social relationships with classmates had also remained positive and unaffected by the classroom incident, suggesting that children her age had interpreted Amanda's behavior as obviously inappropriate, rather than reflecting any negative characteristics of Emma or our family. Her continued popularity and leadership within her peer group indicated that the assault had not damaged her social development or self-confidence. The security measures that Marcus had implemented had provided Emma with tangible evidence of our commitment to her protection, while creating opportunities for her to express concerns about family safety and boundaries. Her questions about Amanda's surveillance behavior had led to productive discussions about appropriate adult conduct and the importance of maintaining boundaries with individuals whose behavior demonstrated potential for harm. Emma's relationship with Marcus had been strengthened through their shared experience of addressing the family crisis and his consistent demonstration of protective leadership during challenging circumstances. Her observation of his systematic approach to problem-solving and boundary enforcement had provided valuable examples of appropriate responses to threatening behavior, while reinforcing her confidence in his ability to ensure her safety. Our marriage relationship had also been fortified through the crisis experience and our shared commitment to prioritizing Emma's well-being over accommodation of family dysfunction. The external pressure had clarified our values and strengthened our partnership, while eliminating ambiguity about our willingness to protect our immediate family from harm, regardless of the source or claimed justification. Marcus's leadership during the extended conflict had demonstrated the practical applications of his military and corporate expertise in civilian family circumstances, while providing powerful examples of how professional skills could be adapted to protect loved ones from sophisticated manipulation and harassment. His systematic approach had achieved our protective goals while maintaining ethical standards and legal compliance. The effectiveness of our comprehensive strategy had also created opportunities for broader reflection about family relationships, personal boundaries, and the importance of protecting children from adults whose behavior demonstrated disregard for their safety and well-being. Our experience had validated principles about healthy family dynamics, while providing practical examples of how boundaries could be established and maintained through appropriate planning and implementation. The documentation that Marcus had maintained throughout the conflict had created comprehensive records that would support future legal action if necessary, while providing evidence of our reasonable and proportionate response to legitimate threats. His systematic approach had positioned our family to continue thriving while maintaining protection from individuals whose behavior had proven harmful and potentially dangerous. The financial independence that we had established by terminating support for Amanda and Eleanor had also created resources that could be redirected toward Emma's educational opportunities, our family's security needs, and investments in our own development and stability. The elimination of constant financial obligation had reduced stress while providing greater flexibility for supporting Emma's academic and extracurricular interests. Emma's expanded educational opportunities had included enrollment in advanced academic programs, specialized tutoring in areas of particular interest, and extracurricular activities that supported her intellectual development and social engagement. The resources previously devoted to supporting dysfunction had been redirected toward investments in her future that would compound over time to create significant advantages. The psychological benefits of establishing appropriate boundaries had also generated improvements in our overall family dynamics and individual well-being. The elimination of constant crisis management and emotional manipulation had created space for positive development and genuine enjoyment of family time, without the underlying stress and obligation that had characterized our previous relationship with my extended family. Marcus's corporate advancement had continued without disruption despite Amanda and Eleanor's attempts at professional sabotage, with his handling of the family crisis actually demonstrating leadership capabilities that had enhanced his reputation among colleagues and industry professionals. His systematic approach to protecting his family had generated respect and admiration, while reinforcing his effectiveness as an executive capable of managing complex challenges. The community recognition that our family had received for our principled response to difficult circumstances had also created opportunities for Marcus to share his expertise about family leadership and crisis management with other parents and community organizations. His experience had become a resource for families facing similar challenges while establishing our household as an example of effective boundary management and child protection. Emma's continued flourishing under the protection we had established had become visible to teachers, friends, and community members who observed her confidence, academic achievement, and social development. Her example demonstrated that children could recover from traumatic experiences when provided with appropriate support, clear messaging about their safety, and consistent protection from harmful individuals. The long-term stability that our protective measures had created would enable Emma to continue developing her potential, without fear of harassment or manipulation from adults whose behavior had proven threatening to her well-being. Our experience had established foundation for her future success while providing her with examples of how appropriate adults respond to protect children from harm and dysfunction. The gradual revelation of truth regarding Amanda and Eleanor's behavior began to transform community perceptions about our family conflict, while generating widespread recognition for the principled leadership that Marcus had demonstrated throughout the challenging circumstances. The systematic documentation and professional response that had characterized our approach created credible evidence that enabled other family members and community figures to understand the legitimate concerns that had motivated our protective measures. The first significant shift in external perception occurred when our pastor, Reverend Michael Thompson, approached Marcus following Sunday morning service to discuss the family situation that had been brought to his attention through Eleanor's attempts to mobilize religious pressure for reconciliation. Reverend Thompson had initially received Eleanor's version of events with sympathetic concern, but subsequent investigation had revealed inconsistencies and concerning details that prompted his request for direct communication with our family. Marcus's conversation with Reverend Thompson provided an opportunity to present factual information about the assault incident and our protective response, while demonstrating the thoughtful consideration and ethical principles that had guided our decision-making process. The pastor's experience with family counseling and crisis intervention enabled him to recognize the appropriateness of our boundaries, while understanding the manipulation tactics that Eleanor had employed in her appeals for religious intervention. Reverend Thompson's assessment of the situation led to his formal withdrawal of support for Eleanor's reconciliation efforts and his subsequent communication to other church members, about the importance of understanding complete circumstances before involving themselves in family disputes. His pastoral guidance emphasized principles of child protection and appropriate boundaries, while discouraging congregation members from pressuring our family to accommodate behavior that threatened Emma's safety and well-being. The pastor's public support for our position created significant influence within our religious community, while demonstrating that moral leadership recognized the validity of our protective measures. His endorsement carried particular weight due to his reputation for careful judgment and his commitment to biblical principles about family relationships and child protection that supported our approach to addressing threatening behavior. The transformation in religious community perception was followed by similar recognition from educational authorities who had observed the systematic harassment campaigns directed toward Emma's school and the professional manner in which Marcus had coordinated protective measures. The school district's administration had been impressed by the comprehensive documentation and proactive communication that had enabled them to respond effectively to unauthorized contact attempts while maintaining focus on Emma's educational needs. Principal Sarah Martinez had shared our situation with other district administrators as an example of effective family crisis management that protected student safety while maintaining appropriate boundaries with individuals who demonstrated potential for harmful behavior. Her presentation had emphasized the importance of parental advocacy and systematic planning in addressing threats to student well-being, while highlighting the professional competence that Marcus had demonstrated throughout the challenging circumstances. The educational community's recognition had generated invitations for Marcus to participate in district committees focused on student safety protocols and family crisis management procedures. His expertise in organizational leadership and systematic planning had proven valuable for developing policies that would protect other students from similar threats, while providing administrators with frameworks for responding to complex family conflicts that affected school environments. Marcus's growing reputation within educational circles had also created opportunities for him to mentor other parents who faced family conflicts that threatened their children's safety and academic development. His systematic approach to documentation, boundary establishment, and protective planning had become a resource for families dealing with manipulation, harassment, and threats from individuals who exploited family relationships for personal advantage. The professional validation that Marcus received from educational authorities was complemented by similar recognition from law enforcement agencies that had investigated the false reports and harassment campaigns directed toward our family. Detective Lieutenant James Rodriguez, who had coordinated the investigation of Amanda's stalking behavior, had commended Marcus for the comprehensive documentation and professional cooperation that had enabled rapid resolution of the criminal complaints. Detective Rodriguez had noted that Marcus's systematic approach to evidence preservation and legal compliance had created exceptional quality records that would support successful prosecution if Amanda's behavior escalated to include direct threats or violations of restraining orders. The detective's assessment emphasized the importance of proactive planning and professional documentation in protecting families from sophisticated manipulation while maintaining legal credibility. The law enforcement recognition had generated requests for Marcus to participate in community education programs about family safety planning and documentation procedures that could protect other families from similar threats. His expertise in systematic planning and crisis management had proven valuable for teaching other parents about protective measures while demonstrating the effectiveness of professional approaches to family conflict resolution. Marcus's involvement in community safety education had also strengthened his relationships with local law enforcement leadership, while establishing his reputation as a community advocate for family protection and child safety. His military background and corporate expertise had provided credibility that enhanced the effectiveness of his educational contributions while demonstrating practical applications of leadership principles in civilian family circumstances. The professional networks that Marcus had developed through his corporate position at Atlantic Maritime Solutions had also provided significant support and recognition for his handling of the family crisis. His colleagues and industry associates had observed his systematic approach to protecting his family while maintaining professional effectiveness, generating admiration for his leadership capabilities and personal integrity under challenging circumstances. Chief Operating Officer Patricia Williams had shared Marcus's situation with the company's senior leadership team as an example of executive character and crisis management that reflected the values and competencies that Atlantic Maritime Solutions sought to develop throughout their organization. Her presentation had emphasized the systematic planning and ethical decision-making that Marcus had demonstrated, while protecting his family from threats and manipulation. The corporate recognition had contributed to Marcus's advancement within Atlantic Maritime Solutions, while establishing his reputation as a leader capable of managing complex personal challenges without compromising professional responsibilities or organizational effectiveness. His approach had demonstrated the integration of leadership principles across personal and professional contexts that distinguished exceptional executives from those who compartmentalized their capabilities. Marcus's growing professional reputation had generated invitations to speak at industry conferences about leadership development and crisis management that applied military and corporate principles to civilian challenges. His presentations had emphasized the importance of systematic planning, clear communication, and decisive action in protecting organizational assets and personnel while maintaining ethical standards and legal compliance. The industry recognition that Marcus received for his leadership approach had also created opportunities for consulting relationships with other organizations that faced complex personnel challenges and crisis management situations. His expertise in systematic planning and boundary enforcement had proven valuable for addressing workplace conflicts and protecting organizational stability while maintaining focus on mission accomplishment and stakeholder protection. The expanding professional recognition had reinforced Marcus's position as a thought leader in organizational management, while demonstrating the practical applications of military leadership principles in corporate and civilian environments. His experience with family crisis management had become a powerful example of how systematic planning and principled decision-making could address complex challenges while maintaining integrity and effectiveness. The community validation that our family received for our principled response to difficult circumstances had also generated recognition for Emma's remarkable resilience and continued academic achievement despite the traumatic experience of assault by a family member. Her teachers and classmates had observed her confidence and enthusiasm for learning, while noting the positive family support that had enabled her emotional recovery and continued development. Emma's academic performance had continued to exceed expectations following the implementation of protective measures, with her advanced reading skills and mathematical capabilities generating recognition from educational specialists who worked with gifted students. Her intellectual development had benefited from the stability and security that our boundaries had created, while demonstrating the positive effects of protecting children from harmful family dynamics. The educational recognition that Emma received had created opportunities for her to participate in accelerated learning programs and academic competitions that would challenge her capabilities while providing social connections with peers who shared her intellectual interests and educational commitment. These opportunities represented investments in her future that had been made possible through the redirection of resources previously devoted to supporting family dysfunction. Emma's continued flourishing had also provided powerful testimony to the effectiveness of our protective approach, while demonstrating that children could recover from traumatic experiences when provided with appropriate support, clear messaging about their safety, and consistent protection from individuals whose behavior threatened their well-being. The broader family network had gradually recognized the truth about Amanda and Eleanor's behavior while acknowledging the appropriateness of our protective response to their threats and manipulation. Extended family members who had initially been sympathetic to their claims of unfair treatment had learned about the assault incident and the systematic harassment that had followed our establishment of boundaries. Uncle Robert Harrison, Eleanor's brother-in-law, had contacted Marcus directly to express his support for our protective measures while apologizing for his initial attempts to mediate reconciliation based on incomplete information about the circumstances that had prompted our boundaries. His conversation had revealed that other family members were also reconsidering their positions based on emerging evidence about Amanda and Eleanor's behavior. The family recognition had eliminated potential sources of pressure and manipulation while creating support network for our continued commitment to Emma's protection and our family's stability. The validation from extended family members had reinforced our confidence in the principles that had guided our decision-making, while providing additional resources for maintaining boundaries with individuals whose behavior continued to demonstrate potential for harm. The transformation in community and family perception had created an environment of support and validation that strengthened our resolve, while demonstrating that principled leadership ultimately generated recognition and respect from individuals who valued integrity and child protection. The systematic approach that Marcus had employed had withstood scrutiny from multiple perspectives, while establishing our family's reputation for ethical decision-making and effective crisis management. The ongoing consequences for Amanda and Eleanor had continued to compound as their isolation and financial difficulties created additional problems, while eliminating potential sources of assistance and support. Their investment in manipulation and retaliation had prevented constructive responses to their changed circumstances, while creating new difficulties that further undermined their stability and prospects for improvement. Eleanor's housing situation had deteriorated to the point where foreclosure proceedings were scheduled to begin within 60 days, unless she could secure alternative financing or negotiate payment arrangements that reflected her reduced income capacity. Her lack of employment history and poor credit rating had eliminated most conventional options, while her reputation for manipulation had discouraged potential family assistance. Amanda's homelessness had become reality following her eviction, with her reliance on temporary shelters and transitional housing that provided basic accommodation but no path toward financial independence or stable housing arrangements. Her lack of employment skills and history of instability had created barriers to securing permanent housing, while her involvement in harassment campaigns had damaged her credibility with potential employers and assistance programs. The accumulation of legal complications from their false reports and harassment campaigns had also created ongoing expenses and obligations that further strained their limited resources while providing no beneficial outcomes. Their strategy of attempting to pressure our family through external authorities had generated only additional problems, while demonstrating the futility of manipulation tactics when confronted with systematic documentation and professional response. The mounting pressure of cascading consequences had reached a critical threshold for Amanda and Eleanor, forcing them to confront the fundamental reality that their manipulation strategies had failed to restore financial support, while creating additional problems that threatened their basic survival and security. The systematic failure of their harassment campaigns had eliminated all external avenues for avoiding accountability, while demonstrating that their approach had been counterproductive and ultimately self-destructive. Eleanor's foreclosure proceedings had advanced to the final notification stage, with her mortgage lender scheduling auction of her property within 30 days, unless she could provide full payment of accumulated arrearages plus associated legal fees and penalties. The total amount required for reinstatement had grown beyond her capacity to secure, through conventional financing, family assistance, or emergency aid programs that might have provided temporary relief. The prospect of losing her home had forced Eleanor to acknowledge that her investment of time and energy in attempting to pressure our family had prevented constructive responses to her financial crisis, while creating additional complications that further limited her options. Her focus on restoring previous arrangements had delayed necessary adjustments to her circumstances, while allowing preventable problems to escalate beyond manageable levels. Eleanor's financial advisor, whom she had finally consulted after exhausting other alternatives, had provided frank assessment that her situation required immediate downsizing to affordable housing arrangements and development of realistic income sources that could sustain basic living expenses without external support. The advisor's recommendations emphasized personal responsibility and practical planning that directly contradicted the dependency relationship that Eleanor had maintained with our family for years. The financial planning session had revealed the extent to which Eleanor's lifestyle and expectations had exceeded her actual resources and capabilities, creating unsustainable arrangements that required constant external subsidization to maintain. Her assumption that family obligations would provide permanent financial security had prevented development of personal financial management skills, while creating vulnerability to exactly the type of crisis she now faced. Amanda's circumstances had deteriorated even more dramatically, with her homelessness creating daily challenges that consumed all available energy and resources while providing no pathway towards stability or improvement. The temporary shelter system that provided her basic accommodation required constant reapplication processes and compliance with restrictions that limited her ability to pursue employment or maintain consistent communication with potential assistance sources. The reality of homelessness had forced Amanda to confront the consequences of choosing harassment and manipulation over constructive responses to her changed circumstances. Her investment of weeks in attempting to pressure our family had prevented job searching, skill development, or relationship building that might have created alternative support systems and income opportunities. Amanda's social worker at the transitional housing facility had emphasized that sustainable housing required employment history, income verification, and references that demonstrated reliability and appropriate social behavior. Amanda's recent involvement in stalking, false reporting, and harassment campaigns had created documentation that would likely prevent approval for permanent housing assistance, while eliminating potential employment opportunities that required background checks. The systematic documentation of their behavior that Marcus had maintained throughout the conflict had created official records that would affect their credibility and opportunities for years to come. Their decision to escalate harassment rather than accept accountability had generated lasting consequences that extended far beyond the immediate financial and housing difficulties they now faced. The isolation that resulted from their social consequences had eliminated potential sources of emotional and practical support that might have assisted their adjustment to changed circumstances. Extended family members, former friends, and community contacts who had initially provided sympathy had gradually distanced themselves as the truth about their behavior became apparent through their own actions and statements. The accumulated stress of financial crisis, housing instability, and social isolation had begun to affect both women's psychological well-being, while creating additional complications that further limited their capacity for constructive problem-solving. The chronic stress of their circumstances had impaired their judgment and decision-making abilities, while intensifying the emotional instability that had contributed to their original assault on Emma. Meanwhile, Marcus's growing reputation for principled leadership and effective crisis management had generated expanding opportunities to influence family protection policies and community safety initiatives that would benefit other families facing similar challenges. His systematic approach to protecting Emma while maintaining ethical standards had demonstrated practical applications of leadership principles that extended beyond immediate family circumstances. The Norfolk Community Foundation had invited Marcus to join their Family Safety Advisory Committee, which developed funding priorities for programs that supported child protection and family crisis intervention services. His expertise in systematic planning and organizational leadership provided valuable perspective for evaluating program effectiveness, while ensuring appropriate allocation of limited resources to initiatives that demonstrated measurable impact. Marcus's involvement with the Community Foundation had created opportunities to advocate for comprehensive family safety planning that addressed manipulation, financial exploitation, and harassment tactics used by individuals who exploited family relationships for personal advantage. His experience had identified gaps in existing support services while demonstrating the importance of proactive preparation and professional documentation in protecting families from sophisticated threats. The advisory committee work had also connected Marcus with other community leaders who shared commitment to family protection and child safety, while possessing complementary expertise in legal advocacy, mental health services, and educational support systems. These professional relationships had created collaborative opportunities that amplified the impact of individual efforts, while establishing networks for sharing resources and best practices. Marcus's influence within the Community Foundation had led to development of the Family Protection Excellence Program, which provided grants and educational resources to families implementing comprehensive safety planning in response to domestic threats, manipulation, and harassment. The program emphasized systematic documentation, professional coordination, and proactive boundary establishment that reflected the approach Marcus had successfully employed to protect our family. The Family Protection Excellence Program had received significant recognition from state and federal agencies that supported innovative approaches to family safety, while demonstrating measurable outcomes for child protection and household stability. The program's success had generated requests for replication in other communities, while establishing Marcus as a thought leader in family crisis management and protective planning. Atlantic Maritime Solutions had also recognized the broader applications of Marcus's crisis management expertise by appointing him to lead their corporate family support initiative, which provided resources and guidance to employees facing family conflicts that threatened their professional effectiveness and personal well-being. The initiative reflected the company's commitment to supporting workforce stability while maintaining operational effectiveness during challenging personal circumstances. The Corporate Family Support Initiative had developed comprehensive resources for employees dealing with family manipulation, financial exploitation, and harassment that could affect their professional performance and workplace safety. Marcus's leadership of the program had created systematic approaches to identifying and addressing family-related threats, while maintaining appropriate boundaries between personal and professional responsibilities. The initiative's success had generated industry recognition for Atlantic Maritime Solutions as an employer that supported workforce well-being through practical assistance and professional resources, rather than simply offering generic counseling referrals that failed to address specific challenges faced by families dealing with manipulation and exploitation. Marcus's expanding influence had also created opportunities to mentor other senior executives who faced family conflicts that threatened their professional effectiveness and organizational responsibilities. His systematic approach to protecting family interests while maintaining professional standards had provided valuable guidance for leaders dealing with similar challenges, while demonstrating integration of personal and professional integrity. The mentoring relationships that Marcus developed had established networks of senior executives who shared commitment to family protection principles while possessing resources and influence that could support broader community initiatives focused on child safety and family stability. These professional connections had created collaborative opportunities that extended the impact of individual protective efforts while building institutional support for family-centered policies. The Virginia State Bar Association had invited Marcus to participate in their Family Law Reform Commission, which evaluated legal frameworks for protecting families from manipulation, harassment, and financial exploitation that often escaped traditional domestic violence classifications. His experience with sophisticated manipulation tactics had provided valuable insight for developing legal remedies that addressed emerging threats to family safety and stability. Marcus's contribution to legal reform efforts had emphasized the importance of recognizing financial exploitation and psychological manipulation as serious threats that required formal legal remedies and enforcement mechanisms. His advocacy had supported expansion of protective order provisions and harassment statutes that addressed sophisticated tactics used by individuals who exploited family relationships for personal advantage. The legal reform work had also created opportunities for Marcus to educate attorneys, judges, and law enforcement personnel about the systematic documentation and evidence preservation techniques that could support successful prosecution of family-related harassment and exploitation cases. His expertise in organizational planning and systematic documentation had proven valuable for improving legal outcomes while protecting families from continued threats. Emma's continued academic excellence and emotional stability had provided powerful testimony to the effectiveness of comprehensive family protection while demonstrating that children could thrive when provided with appropriate security and consistent support from adults committed to their well-being. Her achievements had become visible examples of positive outcomes that could result from principled family leadership and protective planning. Emma's participation in the Regional Academic Excellence Program had generated recognition for her advanced capabilities while creating opportunities to interact with other intellectually gifted students who shared her enthusiasm for learning and academic achievement. The program had provided social connections that reinforced her confidence while demonstrating that academic excellence was valued and celebrated by appropriate peer groups. The academic recognition that Emma received had also created opportunities for her to participate in community service projects that utilized her intellectual capabilities for positive social impact, while teaching her about the responsibilities that accompany privilege and opportunity. Her involvement in literacy tutoring for younger students had demonstrated leadership potential, while reinforcing her understanding of the importance of helping others develop their own capabilities. Emma's resilience and continued development had become inspiration for other families dealing with threats to child safety, while providing evidence that appropriate protective measures could create space for positive growth and achievement. Her example had been shared through community education programs that emphasize the importance of prioritizing child well-being over accommodation of family dysfunction. The transformation in our family circumstances had also created financial resources that could be invested in Emma's educational opportunities and our long-term security, rather than being diverted to support individuals whose behavior threatened our well-being and stability. The elimination of monthly financial obligations to Amanda and Eleanor had provided significant budget flexibility, while removing constant stress associated with crisis management and manipulation. The improved financial position had enabled expanded educational investments that would compound over time to create substantial advantages for Emma's future academic and professional opportunities. These investments included advanced tutoring, educational technology, extracurricular activities, and preparation for competitive academic programs that would maximize her intellectual development and achievement potential. Our enhanced financial security had also supported implementation of additional protective measures that would maintain our family's safety and stability while providing resources for continued community involvement and professional development opportunities. The economic benefits of establishing appropriate boundaries had validated the practical wisdom of prioritizing family protection over accommodation of exploitation and manipulation. The systematic success of our protective approach had created a comprehensive model for family crisis management that demonstrated integration of personal values, professional expertise, and community resources in addressing complex threats to family safety and stability. Marcus's leadership had transformed a traumatic incident into an opportunity for positive development, while establishing foundation for continued growth and influence. The expanding recognition that our family received for principled response to difficult circumstances had generated invitations to share our experience with other families, community organizations, and professional groups that could benefit from practical examples of effective crisis management and family protection. Our story had become a resource for demonstrating that systematic planning and courageous leadership could overcome sophisticated manipulation, while creating opportunities for positive transformation and community impact. The convergence of mounting personal crises and the undeniable failure of their manipulation strategies had brought Amanda and Eleanor to a critical decision point that would determine their future trajectory and potential for rehabilitation. The systematic collapse of their harassment campaigns, combined with the accelerating consequences of their destructive choices, had eliminated all external avenues for avoiding accountability, while forcing them to confront fundamental questions about their values, priorities, and commitment to personal transformation. Eleanor's impending foreclosure had reached the final administrative stages, with her mortgage servicer completing legal preparations for property auction that would occur within 14 days, unless she could demonstrate capacity for loan reinstatement or acceptable alternative arrangements. The mathematical reality of her financial obligations had exceeded her available resources by margins that eliminated conventional solutions, while requiring either complete lifestyle restructuring or acceptance of permanent housing displacement. The housing crisis had prompted Eleanor to schedule consultations with 3 different bankruptcy attorneys who could evaluate potential legal protections and debt reorganization strategies that might preserve some financial stability while addressing her accumulated obligations. These professional meetings had forced her to provide comprehensive documentation of her financial decisions and spending patterns over the previous 3 years, creating detailed records that revealed the extent of her dependency on external support and poor resource management. The bankruptcy consultation process had generated uncomfortable revelations about Eleanor's financial behavior that challenged her long-held assumptions about family obligations and personal entitlements. The attorneys had systematically documented that her monthly expenses had consistently exceeded her income by amounts that required external subsidization to maintain, demonstrating unsustainable financial practices that would have resulted in crisis regardless of changes in family support arrangements. The legal analysis had also revealed that Eleanor's previous lifestyle had been artificially maintained through resources that exceeded typical family assistance patterns, suggesting that her expectations for continued support had been unrealistic and inappropriate. The attorneys had emphasized that sustainable financial recovery required acceptance of reduced living standards and development of income sources commensurate with her actual capabilities and market value. Eleanor's most experienced bankruptcy attorney had provided particularly direct assessment of her situation, explaining that successful debt reorganization required demonstrated commitment to behavioral change and realistic financial planning that eliminated dependency on external support sources. The attorney had noted that Eleanor's recent involvement in harassment and false reporting activities created additional complications that could affect court approval of reorganization proposals and her eligibility for certain protective measures. Amanda's circumstances had deteriorated to critical levels that threatened her basic health and safety while eliminating most conventional pathways for securing stable housing and employment. The transitional shelter system that provided her temporary accommodation had implemented increasingly restrictive requirements that reflected concern about her psychological stability and potential impact on other residents who required safe and supportive environments for their own recovery efforts. The shelter administration had documented multiple incidents involving Amanda's inappropriate behavior toward staff members and other residents, including verbal outbursts, violation of facility rules, and attempts to manipulate therapeutic programming for personal advantage, rather than genuine participation in rehabilitation activities. These behavioral patterns had generated formal warnings that could result in permanent exclusion from emergency housing assistance if improvements were not demonstrated immediately. Amanda's assigned social worker had provided comprehensive assessment of her situation that emphasized the direct relationship between her recent harassment activities and her current difficulties in securing housing and employment opportunities. The social worker had explained that potential landlords and employers typically conducted background checks that would reveal her involvement in stalking, false reporting, and other activities that demonstrated poor judgment and potential liability concerns. The professional assessment had included recommendations for intensive psychological counseling and behavioral modification programming that could address the underlying attitudes and decision-making patterns that had led to her current circumstances. However, the social worker had emphasized that successful rehabilitation required genuine acknowledgement of personal responsibility and commitment to substantial behavioral change, rather than continued attempts to manipulate external circumstances. Amanda's situation had also attracted attention from mental health crisis intervention specialists, who were concerned about her increasing isolation, deteriorating self-care, and expressions of resentment toward individuals who had achieved stability and success. The crisis assessment had identified warning signs that suggested potential for escalating inappropriate behavior if her psychological decline continued without professional intervention and voluntary commitment to treatment. The accumulated stress and consequences of their unsuccessful manipulation campaigns had created a convergence of circumstances that eliminated most alternatives to genuine accountability and behavioral change. Both women faced immediate decisions about whether to continue destructive patterns that had proven counterproductive, or to acknowledge their responsibility for current circumstances while beginning the difficult process of personal transformation and rehabilitation. Eleanor's decision-making process had been influenced by a pivotal conversation with her brother Robert, who had maintained minimal contact throughout the family conflict, but had finally agreed to discuss her situation following her request for emergency financial assistance to prevent foreclosure. Robert's response had provided stark assessment of her choices, while offering conditional support that required demonstrated accountability and commitment to change. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.